Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We know your day is really busy, and so we really appreciate you for carving some time out to join us. Today's training webinar is going to cover how to use automation to remove routine tasks from a recruiter's day to make their recruiting process or your recruiting process more efficient and focus your energies on higher value activities like talking to drivers and building those relationships. So my name is Leah Kelly, and I'm here with Kim Theken, Director of Account Management. Kim's been with us for about 12 years and has a ton of experience in recruiting and the trucking industry in general. Today, she's going to cover many of the most popular ways automation can help to improve the recruiting process and help your business to a new level of success. So including responding to new applicants, applying tags, application routing, scoring, auto emails, process triggers, status changes, and employment verifications. So, but before I pass it over to her, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and we're going to send it to you within the next 24 hours. So if you get interrupted for some reason or if you jump off the call, don't worry about it. You'll get a copy of this recording tomorrow around 2 p.m. Central. And then I'm also going to include the slide deck too, so you can have some of these things in writing to refer to later. Also, don't forget to ask questions. Just feel free to submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation. You can do so using the text box under the questions section in your GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to get to those as we go through the webinar, but if we can't get to them right away, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. And that's all I've got. So Kim, I will pass it over to you.
Well, great. Like Leah said, thanks everybody for joining today. We're going to talk through quite a bit of this. There's not a lot to actually demo because a lot of the things we're going to talk about are highly customized and they're kind of suited to fit your business, and everybody's business is different from another's, and so some of these things may be great solutions for smaller companies, mid-sized companies. There could be things that are specific, geared more towards larger companies. So we're going to kind of talk about a lot of different things, and they may not suit everybody, but there should be several things in here that you can choose from that might be helpful. Some of you use automation already. Some of these things you might be already using, so that's great if you are. But we're going to kind of take a little approach and go down a bunch of different avenues and talk about things. And as Leah mentioned, if there's questions, feel free to ask them as we go along, and I'll try to pause every so often and see if there's anything specific to what we've discussed, and then we can take those questions. So when we're talking about responding to new applicants, a lot of clients want to get some communication going right away with the applicant, which is a good thing for sure. We have the ability, if you don't already know or not using it, we have the ability to set up auto response messages. So essentially, once an application hits the system, then a message can be sent out to the applicant to let them know that you've received their application. It can be something generic that's, from the company, but not from anybody specific. So something that's geared towards, thank you for applying, we're reviewing your application, here's how to reach out to us if you have questions. Then there's also a personalized option that can come from a specific person, such as the recruiter. So in some cases, you want to make that contact and start building the relationship at the beginning of the process. So these personalized messages can fire right at the time the application hits the system and goes through your routing rules and gets assigned to a recruiter. A personalized message can be sent immediately out of the system to let them know, hey, Kim's reviewing your application, reach out to me and we can talk. I have great opportunities. And you can even share some of the specifics about any dedicated runs or anything interesting that you want to share about your company. You can start that communication at the beginning, but make it more personalized. So there's a couple of options and avenues you can take there. And certainly if you're not using auto response messages, it would be something to consider to start using. We do have thank you page text on the IntelliApp, so you can customize messages there as well. But this would be like an email response that's being sent out right after that application or lead hits the system. So Leah, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so tagging. I know everybody sees tags in their systems. Some people use them heavily, others do not use them so well. So talking about applying tags. Now, just in case you're not familiar with the use of tags, tags are a way to report on additional data elements that you may need to know about later. Some of the most popular ones are the ones that you see on the screen. So like, how did you hear about us? Have you been referred by an existing employee or driver, and capturing that employee or driver's name. Some people need to have drivers with TWIC or hazmat. And so those are a lot of the questions that are on the application that you can take those answers and pre-populate a tag in the tagging area. The benefit that that'll give you is that later on down the road, once you're processing these applicants and you want to go back and report on this information, you'll have a tag applied with a value that you can then report on. So for heard about us as an example, a lot of people, you get a source of IntelliApp that comes into the system, but there's a question on the application that you're asking the driver, like, where did you get to the IntelliApp? Were you on Indeed? Were you on, Monster, someplace like that? The driver can answer that question within the application, and then we can set it up so that that question will then apply the tag in the system, heard about us. And then from there, you can report on it and start tracking at a more granular level where these IntelliApps are coming from. With the driver referrals, a lot of times you have kind of systems in place where you're going to pay out referral bonuses. And so you want to know which employee or which driver referred the applicant so you can report on it and then pay out those bonuses. With TWIC and hazmat, it's valuable to know who has those. So it could be something as simple as a yes or no. It could be something a yes or no plus what the expiration date of those items are, and then have the ability to report on them by the tag. And also when you're doing a search, you'll have the ability to search off of those tag values. So say that I'm looking for somebody that's applied and maybe they're in a particular work list in the system and I want to know who has TWIC. Then I can do a tag search from the search area to see all the applicants that have applied in a given work list that have that TWIC. So it kind of gives you those additional ways to report on the information without having to depend on internal personnel to apply those tags manually. So again, it's taking the question from the application, from the IntelliApp, and then applying the answer to that question in a tag so you can report on it. So that just takes out another step, another manual thing that you have to depend on people to do. It takes that out of the process. So it definitely simplifies things. These are just 3 examples, but really anything you can think of, if there's on that company questions page of the application where you have more personalized questions pertaining to your company, those are the types of areas that we add these types of questions where we can pre-populate tags. So if you think that that might benefit you, then definitely let's work on getting those set up.
Cool. I'm going to back up one slide just because there's several questions about this one. One of them is what format, well, first of all, where can you find the section to add auto response messages?
Okay, so the auto response messages are something that we set up on our side initially. So the generic auto response messages you can get with your account manager and you can tell them what you want that auto response message to say. And if it's just a specific, company general message, then you can craft the message that you want to send it off to your account manager and they can set it up. And the way it will go out is as soon as the application hits the system, then that message is going to auto reply an email back out to the driver immediately. So that's a generic one. You craft the message, send it to us, and we'll implement that for you. For the personalized version, the person or people that are designated as a primary user on the account have access to be able to edit, create, and modify personalized messages, auto response messages. We have to set it up initially to get you going. Once we get it set up, then the primaries have the ability to be able to edit and manage that going forward. So when you have new employees start, we have a setup on our end where we copy, you know, an existing recruiter when we set up a new user. So that feature gets implemented and we can just modify the names and personalize the message. So it's a control that the primaries would have access to. And again, it's just a simple reach out to your account manager, tell them that you're interested in the personalized version of an auto response message, and then they'll know what to do to get that set up for you.
And that's an email, or can it be a text message also?
It's normally an email. That's kind of the avenue that we go. I'm not sure if we can do it in a text message. Usually a lot of the text and stuff come in later with drip and that type of thing. But if you're interested in doing a text, you know, tell your account manager that that's the interest that you have, and we'll see if we can accommodate that for you.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Now let's move forward.
Awesome. So new application, and again, we're kind of talking through these things as we starting with the application and moving forward through the process. So we're kind of going in a sequence here. So when we're talking about application routing, I think everybody's familiar with this process, but if you're a new user of the system, we have, you know, many different ways that we can route applications automatically. So having the system do the routing for you takes out the, you know, manual part of like a manager auto assigning these out, you know, by clicking the recruiter box. If everything's coming in as unassigned today, I would definitely think about adding some routing rules so we can automate that for you. So there's several examples here on the page. We can do state routing. So if you have locations that certain recruiters work, like, you know, certain people have different states, we can set up routing based upon the different state options. So one recruiter could have a list of several different states that they recruit for, and that could be totally different from another recruiter. We also have the ability to do some 3-digit zip code prefix routing. So if you have really specific dedicated areas that you're recruiting for, and maybe drivers need to live within a certain distance of a terminal in order to be able to work on a specific account, that may be an area where you could do some 3-digit zip code prefix routing. So for example, if I live in a zip code of 37064, my 3-digit zip code routing prefix would be 370. So it would be picking up and looking for anything that starts with 370 zip code. And we could say, hey, 370 is going to assign to Kim when they come in. So any leads or applications coming in that are set up with that 3-digit prefix would route to a specific person. We can also do referrer code routing. So if you're doing advertising and you're using specific referrer codes in that advertising, and you want those referrer codes to route to a specific individual, or maybe even round robin to a group of people for that particular referrer code, we have the ability to do that. Same with source routing. So if you're advertising on Indeed, for example, and Indeed applications are coming into the system, you can say, I want Indeed applications to route to Kim. Or maybe I want Indeed applications to round robin between 5 different people. Those are all examples of how the system can do that work for you. So you're not manually having to review those applications as they come in and then assign them out. We can also assign work lists. So when we're talking about work lists can be several different things. They can be locations. So if you have different locations, different terminals that you're hiring for, and you have work lists set up for those locations, we can silo applications into those work lists based upon a question or something on the application. You know, what location are you applying to, for an example? And those applications come in and they auto assign to that particular work list based on the selection from the application. Some people don't use locations for work lists, they use positions. So maybe we have a owner operator, company driver, lease purchase, those different types of things. We have the ways to set up work lists so we can silo those applications into those positions and more easily assign those out. So you can do work list assignments, you can do recruiter assignments, we can even do processor assignments. So if you have processors that you want to assign at the beginning of the hiring cycle instead of waiting for them to get to a certain status or for the recruiter to assign the processor, we can assign those at the beginning of the process based upon these same things, or associations of recruiters to processors. So if a given recruiter, for example, works with a given processor, we have ways to get those auto assignments made too. So there's a lot of flexibility with routing. A lot of people really like to use round robins if you have a larger recruiting team and you want to kind of evenly distribute the work, so not one person getting bogged down with the bulk of the applications. Round robins are definitely something to consider. We can even take and divide the round robins. So you can have like an IntelliApp round robin versus everything else that might be considered a lead or coming in from other sources above and beyond the IntelliApp. You can have those separate round robins. So we're kind of splitting the IntelliApp volumes and then the lead volumes. So there's a lot of flexibility there. If you're not already using these routing tools, it might be something to consider. And again, these things may not be for everyone particularly, but there's going to be some things that might make sense for your workflow and might be able to trim out some time in your day. Leah, any questions that we want to cover before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, just speaking of leads versus full apps and IntelliApps, there's a few questions about if we can assign or if we can do auto response messages to leads, or does it only work for full apps? The same question for the tagging too. Can you use the auto tagging with leads, or is that just IntelliApps?
So with the leads versus IntelliApps and the tagging portion of it, the questions most likely are going to be on the IntelliApp. Now there is some cases where you have custom lead forms, and there is our advanced API that gives you the ability to take questions, custom questions from leads forms, and kind of do some of those similar things. We would have to take a look at the different sources that you're wanting to do that with and see what the options are. When we're talking about an advanced API situation with those customized lead forms, there could be a cost associated with doing something like that because it involves some programming work that has to happen behind the scenes, not only on our side, but on the vendor side. So we can look at those situations and see what the options are. With the Leah, what was that first question that was before the tagging in regard to the lead versus the auto responses? Okay, yes, you can do auto response messages based upon leads or IntelliApps. It's the same message essentially that goes out. So if you're trying to be specific, you'll want the message to be sort of generic, not mentioning like the IntelliApp, for example, because somebody would get the same message if they completed an IntelliApp versus a lead app. So there might be some changes that you'd have to make in the verbiage to make it make sense for those that completed a lead, but the option does exist.
Okay, great. So let's move on.
Great. So scoring. Now, scoring is something that some people use, not all people, but it's an available option. When we talk about scoring, we're talking about not really qualifying versus disqualifying. We like to talk about it as in sorting applications to get the most qualified applicants to the top of the list, so your recruiters are contacting those people first. So to get the scoring, what we suggest is to come up with some questions, maybe 3 or 4. I suggest you don't get too complicated with it, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 questions that kind of surround your hiring criteria. And we're trying to pull out the information from the application based upon your hiring criteria, to sort through the applicants to say, okay, these are the more qualified candidates based upon your criteria and based upon the questions within the IntelliApp. And then the system will assign a score. It could be a positive score, it could be a negative score, depending on how you want to set it up. And then when the application comes into the system in the work list tab, off to the, like in your work list results column, there's a column for the score that's off to the left of the name. And so that score sorts your work list and would pull the most qualified candidates to the top of the list, so your recruiters can start with those and then work their way down the list. We don't like to talk about it as in trying to disqualify an applicant, because that's not what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to bring the better qualified applicants to the top of the list based upon your hiring criteria. So, you know, I usually try to stick to something simple that's like, you know, violations, experience, accidents, those types of things to get the sorting done in the list. But it can be, it's based off questions in the application, and you can, you know, use 4 or 5 is usually what I would recommend questions, and not get too crazy. If you get too complicated, then your recruiters have a difficult time understanding what the score is, to be able to understand what they're looking at when they're reviewing the applications. So usually there's a lot of questions when it comes to scoring, but we will help guide you and get something that makes sense for your team, so it's not too complicated. But it's an easy way to see it in the work list results and to be able to sort.
Okay.
Awesome. So moving on to process emails. So a lot of people don't know that this type of stuff exists, but these are really great tools to kind of set up a basic email that you can send out to applicants for different types of reasons, and be able to have your recruiters run a process inside of Express to send out an email to cover these types of situations. So the examples that we've brought up here are maybe an invitation to complete a full app. So for people that have completed a lead and they haven't completed an IntelliApp, if you're not using Drip and you want a way to kind of encourage the person to fill out a complete full IntelliApp, then you can set up an email. So you can run a process, and we can have this email verbiage. You come up with what you want to say, and maybe that email has a link to your IntelliApp within the email, and we're just encouraging the person to complete this full IntelliApp so you can move them through the process. Maybe you have some restrictive hiring areas, and you're finding yourself sending out a lot of emails telling people they're out of your hiring area. Well, instead of having to do that out of Outlook, by running a process inside of the system, you can send that message out to an applicant and let them know that they're not in your hiring area. And there's, you know, you can include additional information as well, but it gets the message out, again, without having to go outside of the system to do it. And then you have a record that that email was sent, because it's recorded in the process log. So you can always go back and see that that email had been sent to the applicant. There's also a use for like rejection emails or rejection letters. You can create those, run a process, send that out to the applicant using the information that's on file. We take the email address that they put in their application, their subject record, and that's where that email would be sent. Offer letters. Now, some of the offer letters are going to be more particular, because they may include things like position, they might include cents per mile, or if it's not a driver, it might include some sort of pay and other information. We can pull information from tags to pre-populate fields in these emails. So you can basically have these offer letter type of scenarios that share additional information like position and pay. So again, we're pulling information from tags to fill in those fields within the offer letter to send those out, so they're customized and specific to that individual. Also, requests for interviews. Some of our clients do interviews before they hire people, and they're doing interviews at different locations at different times. There's different people facilitating those interviews. So all of that can be customized in a process email. Again, we can pull information from tagging. So if you have different people that are performing these interviews, we can have a tag that has a list of all those people, and then depending on who's tagged in the tag, that person's name pulls into the letter into the appropriate fields, where we can pull dates and times, locations, and all that information. So when it's sent out to the applicant, they have a full, interview request with all the pertinent information. So those are just a few examples, but if you have things that you find you're commonly sending out and you want a way to facilitate that more easily without going outside of the system, then the process email would be the way to go. And in case you're not so familiar with processes, when you're on a subject, you're going to click on the process button above the subject view box. And then when the screen changes down below the subject view box, you're going to have an add process tab, and those would be all set up in there. And it would say something like email out of hiring area, or email offer letter, email request for interview. So those would be different options that you could give to your users, and then they can send out those emails to applicants based on those different scenarios.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a few questions. Can you kind of distinguish between these process emails and drip, and when, as far as use cases and the difference there?
Sure. So there's two separate components here. So drip messages are all driven on status and tags, and drip is an additional feature that can be set up, and it has an additional monthly charge. So drip can do these things, but some people don't, have the budget to pay for drip, and so they're looking for some options to do that outside of drip. So this is where process emails would come into play. Plus with drip, with the tagging options, when we're talking about offer letters and that type of thing, pulling information from tagging into something won't work in drip. So if you have something that's customized like an offer letter, that may not be something that you would facilitate through drip, because it's going to be more customized and not super generic. So drip can facilitate things like an invitation to complete a full IntelliApp. That could be job board scrubber, that could be drip. This is just another avenue to facilitate those things without drip. So they're two different things. They have similar uses, but some of this stuff, when you get into like requests for interviews and offer letters and rejection emails, those would be something that could be more customized when you're using process emails, for example.
Okie dokie, let's move forward.
Great. So we're also talking about processes and triggering other events. So another area where you can create special processes would be to auto apply tags. So auto applying tags based off responses on the IntelliApp. We kind of talked through that a little bit. So we can also create a process where if you have, say, you're hiring a specific type of driver, and that specific type of driver needs different tags applied for reporting purposes before you hire them, you can have a process that auto assigns tags, meaning it moves them from the left unapplied tags to the right applied tags. Maybe they don't have values at this point yet, but you want your recruiters or your processors to fill in those tag values. Then that gives you, you could create a process that says, okay, lease purchase tags. When I run that process, it's going to assign all the tag values that I want a lease purchase driver to have applied with a value. So it just gives you a way to move those tags over to the right, so the recruiter doesn't have to go through, or the processor, and click on all those tag options from the left, move them to the right, and apply a value. By running that process, you could assign 10 tags, then the recruiter goes in there and applies values to the ones that don't have values that weren't pulled from the application. So it kind of gives you a quick way to get multiple things done in one shot. Updating a status. So the example we use here is moving to a pre-approved status. So some clients have status restrictions and they don't want certain users to be able to change subjects to a certain status. So we can do checklist validation, look for different things, make sure that those things are in the system. Like for example, if you you don't want somebody moved to orientation scheduled unless they have certain documents on file, like they have their background screening reports in the system. Maybe they have to have supplied you with a copy of their CDL, and maybe there's some other tags that you wanted applied. We can block statuses from certain users and then give you the ability to run a process that says maybe move this guy to orientation scheduled. And when I run that process, it's going to look to see, do I have my background screening reports? Do I have the copy of the license? Do I have certain tags applied with a value? And if those things are all present, then the status would automatically update for that person that's running the process. So they wouldn't manually be doing it. They'd run a process to do it. And that way the system's able to look for other things at the time they change the status. And if all those things are present, then the status changes. If those things are not present, the status won't change, and they'll know that they have to go get additional information. Auto processes. So status changes, triggering a process to send a driver onboarding forms and scheduling training. So this is a case where we might say, okay, I want a status that's going to I want a status to change. I also want to schedule a certain forms course or training course out to the driver at the same time it changes the status. Maybe I also want it to add a note in the system to a specific user. So one process could do all three of those things. It could change the status, it could schedule the course, it could send a note to somebody to let them know that certain things are going on. So there's by having that process, you get that single thing that you're going to run that's doing multiple things across the system. So that's just an example there. Apply a tag. So on completion of forms, apply a tag for operations and planning equipment needs. That's just an example of another thing you could add to a process. So again, we're thinking just trying to compile different things that are happening in one step. We could also have a process trigger an offer letter in addition to the other things that we talked about, and also send a request for an interview. So it's just gonna, it's again, highly personalized to your company and your needs and where you're trying to trim out time in the process. And if these things sound like things that could take time out of your day, then we certainly need to talk about the options and come up with some ways we can do these things for you. So again, just kind of thinking about lots of these manual tasks and combining them into one area by running a process and doing several different things at one time. Leah, any questions?
Whoops, I was on mute. Let's see, about the process emails, what email address, can you choose what email address you want that to look like it came from, or if they respond to it, is that customizable too?
It is. So when we set these up, we're going to ask you for the from email address, the reply to email address, and we're going to ask you for the verbiage for the body of the email, as well as what you want in this signature line, as far as what it says, like from so and so, or from the recruiting team, if it's going to be something that's more generic. We're going to ask all of that information as a part of the setup. So it can be, all of those pieces can be customized.
Okay, great. And is there something like a reminder? So if maybe in a couple of days, if you don't hear back, you can have somebody, be reminded to look or to reach back out?
I mean, you can set reminders for things certainly at any time. Depending on which of these avenues you're going to take, there could be a way to auto create a next action date. We would just have to talk through what specific avenue you're wanting to go down and what you're wanting the reminder or the notation for, and then we can see what the options are to meet your needs.
Okay, and then are these recorded in the communications view? So you have a history, kind of a record of all the communications that the exchanges between the driver and the recruiter?
So these processes that we're talking about are recorded in the process log. So they're not being recorded in the communications view. And so it depends on, you know, certainly the dashboard email and doing those through the communications view, that's another avenue that you can go as well. And all of those communications are recording the back and forth from you and from the driver. These things that we're talking about, the processes are not logged in there, they're logged in the process log. And so you can see that those things were sent, but any communications that happen outside of that are not being recorded in the communications view. But these are one-off things like, you know, like when you're scheduling an interview, it's sending all of this information, but, you know, there's not the back and forth happening. So you know, it depends on what avenue, you know, works best for you. These are just different options that people have had success with, but there's certainly more ways to skin the cat.
Yes, sorry, I meant to ask for the process emails. Are those recorded? But you answered that as well. So I think you just said yes, those will be in the communications view, and if you run a process, those will be in the process log. But
Right.
both are recorded. So you can always refer back to those. And let's see. I think that was it. There's a few I'm trying to read through, but I'll let you go ahead, and if we can always come back.
Okay, great. Okay, so status change examples. Now we talked a little bit about checklist validation and doing those status changes, but having the system look for things to be present. This is a handy thing. With checklists, you can have multiple checklists. So you can have a recruiting checklist, you could have a processing checklist, you can have a safety checklist. So different departments might be looking for different things. So you can have multiple checklists, you can have as many as you want. And those status changes can run off of different checklists. So, you know, maybe if I'm changing a status to orientation scheduled, I want everything in the recruiting checklist to be present. But maybe when I'm changing to hired, I want everything in the safety checklist to be present. So different things can look at different checklists. So if you're not using checklists today, we've talked about that in one of our previous webinars. I think last month we talked about checklist validation a little bit. So if you're not using checklists, that's something to consider because it is definitely a good, easy way to see what things have been done, what things are pending at a glance. Emails. So status change sends an email to a driver. So there are situations, especially like orientation scheduled. Some people have like a specific information that they want to share with the driver at the time they're scheduled for orientation. Maybe it's, you know, specific to the location that they're going to show up for orientation. Maybe it gives them hotel information and gives them a list of things they need to bring to orientation. But it can be specific to orientation, for example. So when you change the status to orientation scheduled, an email can be sent out at that time that shares all of that information with the driver or the applicant. Those things are handy to get that information out without having to, you know, go outside of the system or try to communicate all of that information in another avenue with attachments or that type of thing. With training, status change schedules a training course. So instead of you moving the status and then having to go to process, add process, schedule communications, maybe, you know, when you change somebody to a certain status that you want them to complete a certain training course. That training course could include forms, it could include videos or both, and maybe even doc uploader courses. So you want to capture some information at the time that somebody's scheduled for orientation or hired, those different things. Again, the status change itself can trigger automatically a course to be scheduled to the driver. So you're kind of speeding up the process and eliminating the recruiter having to do that manual work. Background checks. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but maybe we want to have a third party work on some employment verifications for us. If you have an integration set up with Assurant, we have the ability to send employment verification requests off to Assurant to process for you. So we're going to talk about that in a little more depth. And talk about auto requesting and auto resending on the next slide.
Sorry, did you see that? I was thinking we had our screenshots there, but that's okay. We'll get back to that. So there's several questions. So like process emails and checklist validations and auto responses and all those things, you'll have to reach out to your account manager and they'll ask you all the right questions to make sure that you get set up just like you would need to be. So you can't, a lot of these things you can't do on your own. You'll have to just reach out to your team or to your account manager and they'll help you out. They'll help you get set up. Okay, now
absolutely. And even if you're thinking of something that we haven't talked about today and you're like, you know, this particular thing that I have to do in my process is really cumbersome and I wish there was an easier way to do it, certainly reach out to your account manager, because these things, there's hundreds of avenues to go to kind of speed up these processes. And there could be a solution we haven't talked about today to a problem that you're having, that we can use some of these tools to facilitate an easier way to do this. You know, we don't talk about it a lot, but a lot of people that our account managers have worked and done the jobs that you do. We have people that have worked in safety departments, recruiting departments. We have people that have been processors. So we have a lot of industry knowledge and we've done the jobs that you guys have to do. So we understand the struggles for sure with a lot of this stuff and trying to speed up the process. So we encourage you to ask questions and have a dialogue with us. And we'll be glad to talk through these things and try to find some solutions if there's some cumbersome things you're doing today. Verifications of employment. So for those of you that are on the call that are not primaries, you don't have access to the auto request and auto resend settings, but the people that are primaries on the account, and by primaries I mean they're usually like the managers, directors, VPs, presidents, people have that we call primaries at 10th Street, that have access to make changes on your account. They have the ability to set up auto requesting and auto resending of your verifications through Exchange. So to speed up the process and start these things as automatically as we can, the auto requesting feature exists. So for those requests that are in the system that might go out via email or fax or network, we can start that process for you if the information's in the system, meaning the employer's in the system and we know that that's in the directory and their request method is email, fax, or network. We can get those started for you based upon a status change. So there's some configuration options where you can tell the system when somebody gets to a ready for processing status, for example, I want to start those verifications going out the door automatically. And so we can get those set up based upon those settings so those can start. It can be one status, it can be several statuses, and you can control the number of years that you want to go and get verifications for. And you can control, you know, that for non-drivers, for drivers. It will respect whether somebody's asked you not to contact their current employer. It respects those settings. So if the driver or the applicant checkmarked that box and said, do not contact my current employer, we're not going to send out that request, but we will send out any of the other ones that we see that we can. Again, that's all based on a status change. The auto resend feature will be resending things behind the scenes for you, so you don't have to have your processors or recruiters going back in and resending initial requests to get a response. So you have settings for that as well. So you can say, I want to auto resend it up to 4 times, and I want to do that every 24 hours or every 48 hours until I get a response. Or if the subject moves to a status of not qualified, I want the process to stop at that point. So I don't want to keep trying to get a verification for somebody who's going to end up not qualified. And then we talked about the assurance option for the VOE integration. So there's a couple of avenues you can go here. You could say, I want all of my requests to go to Assurant. I just don't have the staff to be able to get those verifications done. So I want to outsource those to Assurant to go and get that information for me. So it's simple through the system. It's just the request method of Assurant rather than going through fax or email. We have some screenshots here so you can visually kind of see what it looks like. So on the screenshot on the right, it's just showing you an example of, I want to send big boy trucking off to Assurant. Now, again, you can choose, you don't have to send 100% of your things to Assurant. Maybe you're going to do 90% of them, but there's some ones that are difficult and you want them to go do the difficult ones. You can choose which avenue you want to go. There's some settings, which is the screenshot on the left, that you can set. So you can say, I wanted all of them to go. I only want certain ones to go. And you can choose which ones are going to go. So there's some options there if you don't have the staff, or if there's times where you don't want to go chase the mom and pop companies around to get verifications, you could have somebody else do that for you. And essentially the request goes over to them, the release goes over to them, and then they're going to be reaching out to the company to try to obtain that information on your behalf. Once they obtain the information, it's going to come back into the system. It's going to look like a network response does, meaning the information that they obtained is going to be filled in the add a response form. So it'll be all fielded with the data to show the dates of employment they were able to verify, the positions, and all of the other exciting information that you have to gather in the VOE process. So this is just another avenue. This is a relatively newer feature, like within the last year. And so people are starting to really gravitate towards this as an option. So it's just another way to accomplish the verification goal. But of course, you know, the faxing and emailing and network, those things are all facilitated today where you can do it, and it's fairly easy. It's just those, you know, ones you have to chase occasionally that aren't in the directory, or, you know, that are difficult to find information on. So that's just a little bit about those verification options and ways to speed up those processes. If you don't have the auto requesting and auto resending turned on today, I would definitely try to give that a whirl and see if that's helpful to you at all. It should speed up the process quite a bit.
That is a good lead into this question that I've got. So how would you do that? How would you, what is the tool that you would access, or do you need to contact your account manager for that as well, or for the auto request?
Are they talking about for the auto resending and requesting, or for the Assurant piece?
The auto requesting and resending.
Okay, if you look over at my screenshot that's on the left on this screen, it's kind of tiny, but for the people that are primary users in the system, they would turn this on for you. They just click on their name when they're logged into the system. They click on their name in the top right-hand corner, and there's going to be an option for settings that shows up underneath their name once they click on it. Once they click on settings, then they're going to be able to see this controls area, and it's the part that's in the far left of the left screenshot. There's going to be express controls and exchange controls. The auto requesting and auto resending is in the exchange controls when you click on automation. And once you click on automation, you'll see all the options that are there for you to set up based upon the status, how often you want to resend, all of the criteria. There's about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 different options in there that you can set for your individual company. And again, the primary users have access to turn those on and off as needed. If they have trouble finding it, reach out to us and we can direct them there and show them how to get started with that.
Okay, great. And then if you have some, there's some concern about if applicants have the do not contact box checked. So when you do auto resends or auto requests, how does it
Yes.
handle those?
So if the employer is the current employer and the applicant has said do not contact the current employer, then the request would not go out for the current employer. Now, for the other employers, it's going to go out, but there is some settings in there, and you'll see it if you're the person that's setting it up. You'll see that there's some information in there that addresses the do not contact items. It's all written out in there.
Cool. Okay, lots of questions about assurance pricing and excitement about the insurance integration. So yes, you would want to go ahead and contact Assurant directly for pricing. Is that correct, Kim?
Yep, absolutely. That is
Yeah.
correct.
And so yeah, lots of people are using this, but I'm glad to see that there's many more that weren't aware of it, so that now they are aware and they can get started as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't have the contact information for them, you can reach out to your account manager and we can supply that contact information for you so you can reach out and get pricing. It's a fairly easy thing to set up, and it doesn't take too long to get going. There's just some agreements that have to be facilitated on their side and some setup work that has to be done, as well as some setup work on our side. But it's a fairly quick process to get that going. And some release language updates too, because in your drug and alcohol release language, you would have to add Assurant there because Assurant would be reaching out on your behalf, so they need to be listed in that language.
Yes. Okay, and then do you want to talk a little bit about how much like the pricing for some of this automation and how that would work? There's been several questions about that.
So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, there's not going to be a charge for. There is some cases where there could be some complexity depending on what you're wanting to do. And if that complexity involves some development work, there could be a charge. But I would be venturing that almost everything we talked about, besides the Assurant integration, because there is a charge to Assurant to do that work. And if we get into some highly complex stuff like the advanced API with those customized lead forms and questions that are coming in and populating tags there or assigning work lists, there could be some fees in that stuff. But process emails, we can set those up. There's no additional fee for that. Auto applying tags, auto response messages, no additional fee for that. Most of the stuff we tried to talk about is not going to incur a fee. But again, there's could be things that are really specific to your business that we didn't cover and things we need to talk through, but we'll always talk through it. And if there's something that comes up where it's going to take a bigger effort than we anticipated, we'll talk about those things. And if there's a cost, we'll let you know before anything's facilitated. But we try to do as much as we can without having to have a cost incurred. So a lot of these things, there's so many ways to customize the system that there's kind of endless possibilities. And so we just really want you to reach out to us and let us know what things are difficult in your day. And we want to find solutions to those things so we can make your day easier. And we just really want to find those solutions. So just feel free to reach out. If you don't know who your account manager is, maybe you talk to your advisor more, you can certainly reach out to your advisor and they'll be happy to assist as well with any of this. Any other questions, Leah?
No, that's great. You ended on a great note too. Yeah, you can just reach out to your account manager or your advisor and get this, to answer your questions and find solutions and just get started with automation. And it is a great thing because it's not going to incur an extra charge a lot of times, and there's no reason you wouldn't want to start using it. So And yeah, we asked a lot of questions as we went through the webinar, so I think that we're good on the questions thing. If you didn't get your questions answered, if I missed something, just reach out to your account manager and they can help you. And I think that that's it. I'm going to go ahead and send the slide deck and the recording out as well tomorrow. So you'll have a copy of these slides so you can refer to them, and you'll have the recording you can refer to as well. But we just want to tell you thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time. We know you're super busy, and so it's just means a lot that you'd spend some of your day with us. And thanks so much, Kim. That was really a great overview of automation for sure.
Great. We appreciate it, guys. Let us know if you have questions.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.